Alright, this is a reboot of the tutorial about how to use QGIS to load in a WebGIS layer, Google satellite imagery layer, and to make a new vector file and start editing it by digitizing new features. So we're in QGIS now. We have a blank new project. First thing we're going to do is to load in the grid, the survey grid that I created for you that you can download from Blackboard under the Lemon Grove GIS Resources zip file that you've unzipped somewhere onto your hard drive. So you can use the file browser here to navigate to it, or you can go to the Add Vector layer and you can browse through your computer here to navigate to wherever it is that you downloaded and unzipped the file that should be called LGGIS Resources. Inside that, you'll find a series of other folders. Inside each one of these things is an individual shape file, one vector file. The one that I'm going to load now is the one called Tree Survey Grid. I'm going to double click and I'm going to choose the one that's called .shp. That's the main file for a shape file. I'm going to click open, and this is all fine here. I'm just going to click open again, and it loads up right here. Okay? So what this does is zooms us into the part of the world in a particular projection system, a CRS system. We can view that by going under Project and then Project Properties and clicking that. And then what we can actually see is that this thing is in the WGS84 pseudo Mercator projection. There's this particular code for that if you're interested. That is the same projection system that your Google imagery will be in. So I recommend just to start with the grid so that you know that that's going to be in the same projection system. All right. So basically it's going to initiate the project with this projection system, and it's going to help ensure that everything's going to line up as you do your digitizing over time. Okay. So we're good here. We're just going to click OK. We just double check that. Now what we need to do is to load in the Google imagery. So if you haven't added the specific plugin called the OpenLayers plugin, you have to add that in now. So you go to Plugins, Manage and Install Plugins, and in the search window you would type OpenLayers, right? And you'd find the plugin here, OpenLayers plugin, and then down here you'd have to, this would say install. You'd click that, it would download, chug through a bunch of information, install it, will say plugin installed successfully. So mine's already installed. It's also checked so that's enabled. So that's all good. I'm going to close this. And you can find this under now the web file menu that will appear up here. And you'll have the OpenLayers plugin. And it'll give you a variety of web service layers that you can now load into QGIS. So the one we're going to use is Google Maps, and then we're going to use the Google Satellite. We're just going to click, and it will load it in here. So you may get a little pop-up saying something. Don't worry about it. You're going to be wondering what happened to the tree survey grid. Well, remember, the ordering of the layers over here in the layers panel matters. So the Google Satellite is now on top. We're just going to drag it so that it's below, and the tree survey grid is there. Now you're going to want to find which survey grid is yours. There's a variety of ways of doing that. You could sort of click around on them to identify, and then sort of look to see if you can find the information in the surveyor column here that pops up. If you click over here, you can actually bring it up. You can find the name. This one is Andrews, right? Probably a slightly easier way to do that would be, so let me get rid of this identify results panel. It would be to right click on the tree survey grid and then go to open attribute table, and then you find your name in the list under surveyor. So I'm going to pick Brittany in this case. So that's her grid right there, and you see if I click on this thing, it'll actually highlight behind. Just move it over. It'll highlight whatever grid square I actually clicked on. So each row is related to one grid square. So this happens to be Brittany's grid square right there. So once you have your grid square figured out and highlighted, what you want to do is maybe style this, and you can leave it sort of a little bit transparent. You know, properties. So you can do that in a couple of ways once the properties pops up. The first way you can do this is go down to layer rendering, which is under the style panel here in the properties, and you can just drag the whole thing over to like 80, hit apply. You can see the whole thing is gone, kind of fairly transparent. You can see through it. So that might work for you. The other thing that you can do is, if you don't want to make it transparent, you can actually just keep the lines, so the lines between the grids, but turn the colors off. And basically the way you would do that is, well, we're in this sort of single symbol here, and you sort of just click on this thing to choose the color, and I believe you can choose the opacity right here. Turn that all the way down, this last row right here. Click OK. And so now when you hit apply, it basically makes the colors go away, but the sort of borders remain. Of course, because I've got this thing selected in the table, it's still showing up in yellow, so I'd have to go back to the attribute table, and I would just have to not select it or select a different one or whatever it is to get rid of it. So I would just have to remember that this is my grid right here. I can choose my sort of zoom tool, and I can sort of highlight the area I want to zoom into, right? So that's it right there. You can kind of see the boundaries right here. You can style this in a variety of ways. For example, if I wanted to change the lines, I could definitely do that as well. So you click on this sort of simple fill. So we're still in the sort of style panel over here, fill, simple fill, and now you get all of this stuff about the lines and the borders. Click on the color here that says border, and just slide it over till you get a nice color. I'm just going to go all the way white, and then click OK, and now my lines are white. So that makes it really easy to see the border of the area that I need to be digitizing. Okay, so we're ready at this particular moment to start our digitizing process. What we need to do now is to make a brand new blank vector file, a points file. We need to make the table, and we need to make the couple of fields in the table that we're going to populate with some data. Okay, so the way you do that is to go up to Layer, then Create Layer, and then the very first one is going to be New Shapefile Layer. This is the basic new layer tool. Okay, so what we can do is now choose the CRS. So we would click this little button that says Select CRS. And we want to make sure that the CRS is going to match the project CRS and the CRS of the Google imagery, which is that sort of pseudo Mercator projected CRS. So we can try typing in pseudo Mercator. We can actually see the first one popping up here. We know the EPSG code is the same as we saw earlier, so we're going to click OK. So what this is going to do is make sure that when we digitize and we move the underlying imagery, everything's going to stay lined up. This is pretty important at this particular point. So we'll click OK, and we're going to make sure that this is a point. That's what it is by default. We don't want to do lines or polygons at this particular moment. And it's got the ID field by default. What we need to do is add our two other fields. And if you read the project description, the sort of handout, it's got the details about the codes and everything for the fields. So we have two of them. The first one will be T size, and we're going to change that to be whole numbers over here, and that's perfectly fine. And that code is basically 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe. And when I click this button, Add to Fields List, it shows up right here, T size, and then T underscore type, right? And that one is going to be text data, and 10 characters is fine. That's just the length of the number of characters will let you enter it. We have a very short set of code, so that's going to be great. Add that to fields list here. So we have all three of them together. We're going to click OK. It's going to ask us where to save it. So I suggest you make a new folder somewhere in where you're keeping your data, and you call this My Trees, whatever you want to call it, just so you know what it is. Click Open in there, and then you're going to call the shapefile the same thing, My Trees, right? So hit Save, and basically what's going to happen there, if we go looking in where we save that, we should have now My Trees, the folder we made, and we have inside it the shape file. There's the main one. But all the other things, including the database and the projection and all that stuff, is saved on your computer somewhere. Okay, so my trees is also loaded as a layer. It should be on top, hopefully. If it's not on top, drag it to the top. And now we can start editing it. What we do is click this little pencil that says toggle editing. That opens the file for editing and opens up some editing tools. Like I said before, the main one is add feature right here. And we can now just start clicking around on the map. You can still use your zoom tool, so if you want to start in the corner like this, you can zoom in until you see your first trees. You can use the hand tool to drag it around. So you want to do this fairly systematically. Sometimes when you're reloading the imagery, it takes a while. Start in the corner and work your way in rows or something like that. And when you've got this thing ready, you click your new add feature button right here. You get a crosshairs. You find a tree, so I'm looking at a palm tree right here. I click on it, and I can type 1. I can type fairly small, so I'll say 1. And this is palm is the code, right? And I click OK, and I've got entry in my table. I can go to the next tree over here, and I'll click on it like this. And so I've got the feature enabled to save my last entry. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So pretty simply, I can just put a 2, and I can change whatever this is. This is still, I would say, small. And I would change this to conifer, right? Conifer is the code for that. Click, boom. And I keep going along the way. I've got 2 more conifers, so I go 3. I change that to median. I click OK, and I go OK. So this one is 4, also a conifer. Click OK. So you see my dots right there. So how did I get the information to load up? So if you do this by default, everything's going to be blank in those fields every time you click. The way you do that is you want to go to settings up here, and go to options, settings options, and click on that, and you'll get this dialog that's sort of basically like your defaults for the system. And then there's a series of tabs along the side. You can change colors of various things. You can change the icons and a bunch of other stuff. But what you're interested in is going to the one that's called digitizing right here. And under feature creation, what you want to do is click the little button that says reuse last entered attribute values. That's going to make your life a little bit easier. Just going to help you remember what you just previously entered, especially that ID number, which is going to increment. You're going to want to increment each time you add a tree. Okay. So that's basically how you do it. You can change some of this other stuff if you want to change the styles. That's something to do later on when you're sort of more used to using the tool. But if you just check that button, then every time you click a new feature, it doesn't matter where it is, I can go down here and click another one. It's going to load up the information from the last one. And I can just say, okay, 5, still a conifer. In this case, it's bigger, so I'll say a 3 size, a large size tree. I'll click OK, right? And then I can continue my survey. It'll take you a little while maybe to finish your survey grid, depending on the number of trees. But when you've done it, you can hit save. Actually, you should be hitting save, this little button right here. Not the one above it, but this one down here, save layer edits. Save that frequently just in case your computer crashes. When you're done, finally done, hit the save button again, and then go back to where it says toggle editing, and then you're done. All right. Now, if you make mistakes, you can always re-enable editing. We've got a few tools over here. So, for example, you prematurely clicked the dot, or you didn't put the dot in the middle. You can basically click and drag the dot and reposition it anywhere you want. You can also potentially delete the thing, right? So you can actually just select one right here, and you should be able to delete it, I think. Actually, maybe you have to select it with this right here. And then you can potentially delete it, or copy it and paste it. Anyway, there's a variety of things that you can do with the editing tools. You can also roll back to the last time you saved. So there's a variety of ways for you to interact with the edits as you do them, okay? So then if you ever try and close without saving, it'll ask you if you want to save. I'm just going to discard the saves, and then you can see. There we are. Okay, so basically I think that's it. Continue to sort of scroll and then toggle the edits and do that kind of stuff until you're done. We'll take a look at thematic mapping next time.